Today we're going to be kind of exploring how we can show a relationship of two values, one of those functions that we've been talking about. And last week we focused about making them into a table. So now we're going to take it one step farther and we're going to learn how to graph that function. But it always starts out exactly like what we've been doing. So in number one, I have the function y equals 2x minus 4. And then I have a table here. This table has a column for x and a column for y. And it kind of looks like they just took out that middle section of the tables that we were working with last week, but it's still the exact same thing. I have to take those x values, put them into that function, and find out what the y is going to be. So since there isn't room to show all of my work, I can put it off to the side here. So remember, we want to copy it exactly the same, put parentheses where x is. So I have 2 parentheses minus 4, and I'm going to put in negative 2 because that's the first x that they tell me. So when I substitute negative 2 in there, it's 2 times negative 2 minus 4, and I get the value of negative 8. So I'm going to write that in the y box. So since I see that one for the first one, I don't need to write that work every single time. I can just use my calculator, and this time I'm going to be multiplying by negative 1. So I'm going to type in my calculator 2 times negative 1 minus 4, and I get negative 6. Next one, I'm going to type in 2 times, the next value is 0 minus 4. I get negative 4. And then the last one, I'm going to put in a 1, and I get negative 2. And then when I put in positive 2, I get 0. So now that I have my table completed, we're going to use those values as what we call coordinates. Now, coordinates have an x come first, and then the y comes in that second spot. And you can see that they're in this parentheses. That tells you that it's a coordinate that we can graph. So they already filled in where all of my x's are, so you can see that those are the same numbers they already gave me in the table, and so I just need to put the y value with the correct x value. So negative 2 should have negative 8 next to it, negative 1, negative 6, 0, negative 4, 1, negative 2, and 2, 0. So all I've done is take those values from the table and turn them into coordinates. And now I can go ahead and graph them just like we learned in past grades. So let's review some things about our coordinate plane. So this grid right here is called our coordinate plane. That point at the very middle, so I'm going to make a little dot and we're going to label it. That point in the middle is called the origin. And you can see that that word origin kind of looks like original. So that's our original point. That's where we always start at. Now you can see that there's 2 bold lines. There's a bold line going horizontally or from left to right. That's called our x-axis. And then the line that is going vertical, so from the top to the bottom, that's your y-axis. So as I'm graphing these, I always take my pen or my pencil, and I start at the origin. You can see where my cursor is here, and I move on the x-axis first. So I'm going to move from left to right first. Now, since this is a negative 2 for my first coordinate, I'm going to move backwards because it's a negative number. So I'm going to move backwards 2 spaces, and then the y value is negative 8. Well, the negatives on my number line are going to be below that origin. So I'm going to move down 8 and then make my point. And this right here is this first value that we found, this first coordinates, that little green dot. So now let's take a look at our second value. So I have negative 1, negative 6. So starting from the origin, I'm going to move left 1 and then down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and put a little green dot. All right, let's look at the next one. This one is 0, negative 4. So I'm going to start at the origin. And since it says 0, I'm not going to move left or right. I'm going to stay right there. But I have to move down for that negative 4, 4 spaces. And put that little green dot. All right, last point that I found was 2, 0. So from the origin, now that I have a positive 2, I'm going to move right 2 spaces. And then since it says 0, I don't need to move up or down. I'm just going to make my dot right there. Oh, it looks like I missed one of my dots. 1, negative 2. So let's go ahead and do that. So write 1 and then down 2 spaces, make that last dot. And you can see that all of those points that I found form a straight line. So I can take my pen and connect those dots as straight as I can. And then we always want to put arrows because that's a line that continues forever. So from that function, I was able to make a table that matches it, and then I use that table to make my graph. Before we move on to our second example, let's just make ourselves a little reminder on how to graph up at the top of this page. So remember, our coordinates have x first, and then y. And I always like to draw those little arrows to help me remember. So x moves from left to right. So I drew that little arrow to help me, and y moves up and down. Perfect. All right, let's take a look at our second example. We're going to get it started and then come together for the graphing. So this one's function says y equals negative x plus 5. Remember, we talked about if there's a negative in front of the x, we can call that the opposite of x. And they did not give me any x values. So the first thing I'm going to do is put 0 in the middle of my table and pick some negatives and some positives. So I'm just going to go ahead and count by ones: negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. So right now, I'm going to pause the video, and I want you to do the same, and try making just this table on your own. And then we'll come back together and make sure we have the right answers. All right, go ahead and take a look at the table here. You can see my y values have been filled in. And now I'm going to go ahead and fill in that first xy coordinate. So remember, the x value comes first, so negative 2 is going to be on that first blank, and 7 will be on the second blank. And now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to keep doing the last 3 points, and we'll come back together and make sure you're on the right track. All right, now that I have all of my coordinates filled out, we're going to go ahead and start graphing from the origin. So remember, negative x's need to move left from the origin, so 2 spaces left. And then since I have a positive 7, I'm going to go up 7 spaces, and you can count this on your paper to make sure it matches, and then put your dot. Let's go ahead and try one more together, and then we're going to pause the video and let you keep working trying it on your own. So negative 1 goes left, positive 6 goes up, and make your dot. All right, now we're going to go ahead and pause the video. Try the last 3 points on your own. Remember, your point should make a straight line if you're doing it correctly. All right, you can see that my line has been filled in. You can see those green dots. So make sure that your graph matches mine exactly before we move on to that third example. All right, now I have the function y equals 1/3 x minus 2. Now this is a little bit tricky because we're dealing with a fraction. So we always want to make sure keep 0 in the middle of your table. Now, if I pick, say, positive 1, and I try to put that into my calculator, I'm going to get a really long decimal because it's not easy to take 1/3 of 1. So if you have a fraction and you want to figure out nice numbers that will give you easy points to graph, one good trick is to look at that denominator number. So right here I have a 3 in the denominator, and that's a clue of what you should count by to make sure that your fraction is going to make a nice even answer once you solve it out. So since I have a 3 in the denominator, I'm going to count by 3s. So I'm going to use negative 3 and positive 3. And then another counting by 3 will give negative 6 and positive 6. So now that we've helped you out with the picking the... So let's just go over how to type this into the calculator since 1/3 is not a super nice decimal to work with. So in your calculator, you want to type in 1 divided by 3. And then you're going to put times negative 6. And then you can subtract that 2. I got to erase that 3. That's actually a 2. All right. So again, when you see that fraction bar, that means to divide. So in your calculator, you're typing in 1 divided by 3. You're going to hit the times button, negative 6 minus 2, and your answer that you get is negative 4. Go ahead and try that in your calculator. We're going to come back, make sure that you have all the same answers here. All right, now I've had my entire table filled out as well as those coordinates, and I'm ready to go ahead and try graphing. This one, we're going to let you try the entire thing on your own, and then we're going to come back, make sure that our lines match at the end. Okay, so looking at my graph, make sure that your points all fall on a straight line and that you've connected all of those dots. Go ahead and count mine out to make sure that yours matches. Now let's go ahead and flip over onto the back. So on the back, they've actually given you a graph already, and they want you to figure out what the table is that matches that graph. So they've given some helpers for this first one. So remember, your x comes first in that coordinate and the y comes second. So they told me that my first x that I'm looking at is -2. So remember, your x-axis goes left to right, and they are moving 2 spaces left. And then I need to figure out where that crosses, like where that is on the y-axis to find that line. So this first nice point here, where I've drawn my green dot, you can see that that line crosses perfectly on that grid. And that's really important when we're picking our points from this graph. So if I count that out, that was 2 left, and then I went down 3. So remember, down would be negative. So in my table, I'm going to go ahead and put -3 over here as well. So the point -2, -3 is on this graph because it falls on that line. Let's skip this one that is completely blank, and we'll try to figure out what goes with 0. So at the 0 point of the x-axis, I'm looking for where that crosses the line, and it's right here at this green dot. And I had to move up 1 space to get to that line. So that means I'm going to use a +1, and also on the table there as well. All right, last one that they gave me a little helper for was this +2. So remember, go +2, and you can see that the line is above that. So I need to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hops. So I'm going to put a +5 in both of those spots. So now I've got to figure out what those empty spaces might be. So one thing that I like to do is I kind of start at the beginning of the line, and I try to find spots that cross perfectly on that grid. You can see where my cursor is, that's in the middle of a box, so I wouldn't want to pick that. But right here, this is a perfect cross. So at this point where I've just done a green dot, I had to move left 1 space, so I'm going to put in -1 in the x spot. And then I also moved down 1 space, so another -1 for the y, and I can fill that in. Let's try to look for another one. So over here, this crosses in the middle of the box. That doesn't really work. I already used that one in the middle of the box, but here's another perfect one. So I can draw that dot, and now I need to count from the origin. I have to move 1 space right. So I'm going to use a +1, and then I move 3 spaces up, so a +3, and that's the point 1, 3. So all these points are points where that line perfectly crosses over that grid. Let's take a look at the next one. So this one, they're not giving you quite as much help. They're looking for you to kind of figure out where these points could be. So let's look for the point where 0 is. That's an easy one to find. So at 0, it crosses the y-axis at +2. So I can put a +2 with 0. And now that's all the help that they gave me. So I'm going to go ahead and try to find other dots. So let's just try to find out where it crosses. This is a nice perfect cross right here. So I had to move left from the origin 1 space, so -1. And I moved 1, 2, 3 up. So that would be a +3. And let's find one more to the left of that axis there. So this one is a pretty nice cross right here. So I have to move 2 hops left and 1, 2, 3, 4 hops up. So a +4. All right, now let's go ahead and find 2 that are to the right of that 0 point. So if I move right 1 space and up 1 space, that point 1, 1 is on the line. So I can write those down. And then I'm going to go ahead and find this one that crosses perfectly here. I had to move 2 spaces right, and I didn't have to move up or down at all, so I'm going to use a 0. All right, last example for this notes. This one, we're going to kind of let you guys try to find dots. So the first thing that I want you to do, don't even worry about writing anything down. Just look on this graph for where it crosses as perfectly as you can find it. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, try to find dots that you can draw on your graph. All right, I've gone through and I've found all of the dots that I can see crossing pretty perfectly here. And now we're going to go ahead and try to write in those coordinates. So remember, your x value comes first. So from the origin, you always want to count first. And then you're going to count your y's. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I keep writing. All right, go ahead and check your points with mine. Make sure that yours matches. And then we're going to have time to practice this tomorrow.